Okay, so part three of chapter nine, Hollywood television and the left. So we were talking about how Hollywood was a mixture, a fair mixture of both right wing and left wing. And to the extent that the left wing was out of control with the media and with other things, they were somewhat mitigated by the fact that most of the movie moguls in Hollywood were run by right wingers to kind of balance some of that out. Um, Now let's compare a, a couple of things from then and now. So during World War II, most of Hollywood kind of got on board with the same, idea and destination and goal. Despite a lot of Hollywood put aside its differences and its factioning to fight the war, both literally, like Gable and Stewart and others who joined the war, Borgnine, Ryan, a lot of them went to war, and those who stayed home and helped with the propaganda, such as Reagan, who was F4 and couldn't fight, but he went to Hollywood to make propaganda films instead, just to do his part, um, and others who made movies promoting, pushing the Americanism all over the world, pro Army, Air Force, Marine, pro our efforts in the war, anti fascist, anti imperialism, blah, blah, blah. And we spent billions on this effort. War bonds, advertisements, radio, television, or there's no television, movies, the whole bit. For the 4.5 years we were in the war, and for the years after, Americanism was a good thing, and we were all in a somewhat kumbaya agreement, at least when it came to that. Not all foreign policy, but certainly when it came to fighting a righteous war, a righteous effort for the right reasons in an honorable way. Now compare that to the aftermath of 9/11. Now, one of the common threads between the two is Pearl Harbor and 9/11. Pearl Harbor, which sparked our involvement in World War II. Same amount of people, about approximately the same amount of people were killed in both Pearl Harbor and the 9/11 attacks. But what happened after couldn't be more different. Sadly. The Americans' response, Hollywood's response, media's response to Pearl Harbor was immediate, it was hard, and it was all in. There was no doubts, there was no waffling, there was no equivocation. It was balls to the wall, fight them back, kick their ass, take names, end it as fast as possible. There's not much we're not going to let you do to get this job done. We trust you to do the job, and let's go do it. And for years, that was the way. Now, compare that to 9/11. If, for those who don't remember, you should, because there was about 2 weeks of kumbaya following 9/11. 2 weeks where we didn't hear anything from the left, the usual stuff we would have heard. They sat on it. They, incubated that egg, said nothing, cooled their heels, slowed their roll, whatever phrase you want to use, and let things be what they were. They saw America get their back up and say, let's go to it. Let's get on this. And then 2 weeks after, here came the chirping, the whining, the complaining, the accusations, the conspiracy theorists, and it never stopped. It never ended. It grew in size and scope. They made movies about it. They made documentaries about it. They tried to unwind, unravel, unseat, undermine everything they possibly could when it came to fighting the war on terrorism. Now, why the difference? Was it because Nazis and imperialist Japanese were wearing uniforms? I don't know. And the Muslim terrorists are not? Is it because they bombed a military base and the Muslims only bombed Wall Street? Well, they did bomb Pentagon, so that can't be it. I don't know. I have no idea. But somehow the war on terror is not something liberals are willing to fight. We've been fighting the war on terrorism for almost 40 years. It could be honestly said that the hostage crisis in Iran was the first blow, the first major strike. And we've been fighting it ever since. Or I should say, they've been fighting it ever since. We've been fiddle farting around. We had embassies in Africa attacked. We've had the USS Cole attacked. We've had airplanes hijacked. The Achille Lauro ship hijacked. We've had this happen and that happen. We had an attempt on the World Trade Center in 1993 when the Sudanese captured Obama, who was found, or Obama, I did it again, Bin Laden. Clinton was offered him on a silver platter, and he decided, nah, I don't need him. I don't know what to do with him. You keep him. Until later, he orchestrated 9/11. Time and time again, signs were there. We needed to get involved, and we didn't. Everyone's to blame for that one. But when it really mattered, after 9/11, one group of people decided that they were going to be obstacles, and that's the left. All these left-wing nut jobs who, when Clinton was around, swore up and down that he was right, because he was. Even a stopped clock is right twice a day, about the weapons of mass destruction that were probably being compiled in Iraq, and a number of other things. When we went after the Taliban in Afghanistan, half of them later on all wanted to change their minds, but certainly about Iraq, they all changed their minds. It was a very few that all along didn't want to do it, but every one of them signed on to a thing and then later on reneged. And we'll talk about whether there was weapons of mass destruction in some foreign policy video later. I'm not going to argue the point. There was. It's been proven. They're being used in Syria right now, those same weapons of mass destruction. This should not even be an argument, but we've been arguing about it for 15 freaking years. Well, yeah, about that. But more to the point, the response. The left saw to it that we had rules of engagement that handcuffed our soldiers. While they were wringing their hands in Washington, in Congress, they were handcuffing our hands, our soldiers and our Marines and our sailors, fighting a war. From people who hate war, loathe war, anti-war at all costs, peaceniks, doves, and the rest, having anything to do or say with how we conduct a war, as if Vietnam never even happened. The same people complained about the Vietnam and their Vietnam syndrome that they seem to have, performed the same mistakes all over again when it came to the war on terror. Why? Because agenda trumps all. Agenda says no war no matter what. Peace at all costs. And therefore, we will hamper, subdue, curtail anything a soldier, Marine, or sailor might do in their efforts to totally destroy an enemy. So we had Vietnam all over again. And we're still in it. And we're still in it because there are a bunch of cowards in Washington, namely the left in Congress, who will not permit the kind of military actions required to thoroughly destroy an enemy. What they don't understand in their constant harping about the casualties of war and how innocent people can get hurt, which is what's handcuffing our military in the first place, is that far less people would die if we had ended this war quickly, swiftly, without our hands being cuffed in the first place. Because this war is dragged out in both, in Afghanistan, and now, of course, it's come back to Iraq because of our inability to monitor and control our victory there. More people have died than ever would have if we had just ended the war quickly. So the reasoning, typical liberal logic, is to avoid casualties by making it impossible for our military to have a victory which would end a war shortly. So instead, as a result, the war never seems to end and the casualties mount up on both sides. Both sailors and civilians, both Americans and non-Americans. Way to go, libs. And to all the weak-willed, spineless Republicans and rhinos who are guilty of the same thing, I have no love for you either. Now, let's get into, so to conclude, the differences are stark. The modern liberal versus the old Democrat in Hollywood and in Congress and in politics couldn't be more different if they tried. Hollywood is just as against the war and just as against all this stuff as Congress is. They are one and the same. I'm talking about Hollywood now, not about necessarily government, but you've heard actors and actresses say very much the same thing liberals in Congress are saying, and so it doesn't really matter. They're all the same thing. They're all anti-war at all costs, etc., and have been equally part of the message and the culture. The ones that spit on soldiers after Vietnam and the ones that have avoided doing that this time, trying to pretend they're all pro-soldier but against what they do. As I wrote in my book, that's like being for the architect but against the drawings he makes. You can't do that. If you're for the soldier, then you should be for what he stands for and what he does. And the liberals have figured a way of parsing that and separating the two, but they are inseparable. Hollywood, like liberals, always end up on the wrong side of everything. They end up against soldiers, they end up against America, they end up against righteous wars, necessary conflicts, whatever, and then have to weasel their way out to make themselves smell good about it, and they can't. Okay, so let's talk about another incident in Hollywood that people refer. You can't go 2 days without hearing about this event, this term, this whatever, in somewhere in our culture with reference to movies or TV or government, and that is McCarthyism. People are so amazingly uneducated about the McCarthy era, what he did and didn't do, what he caused and didn't cause. It is amazing how incredibly ignorant people are about this subject. It is staggering. They've the left has been able to create a term, McCarthyism, to be used as a word weapon against anything they disagree with, that has any sniff of fascism, has any sniff of something that is being done that they feel is being forced upon them. They've almost taken it so out of context that the word is meaningless, like they do with everything. You apply something often enough, it becomes meaningless. If everybody on the right is Hitler, there's no Hitler. If everything is Hitler, nothing is Hitler, for instance. If everything is McCarthyism, then guess what? Nothing is McCarthyism. The word is meaningless. Now, what is the problem that I have with these ignoramuses? Well, one of the biggest myths or mistakes the people make, and not just left-wingers, I mean everybody makes this mistake, is that McCarthy caused the blacklist in Hollywood. McCarthy had, and is a connection to Hollywood. Well, there's a minor little fact that's I tend to like to bring up when I hear some moron say something like that. Call it a inconvenient truth, and that is that McCarthy had absolutely zero to do with Hollywood. Why? Because the committee that was in charge of rooting out communists and sympathizers in Hollywood was HUAC. HUAC stands for the House Un-American Activities Committee. Underline the word House. That means the folks that are called representatives. What was McCarthy? Joseph McCarthy was a senator, not a representative. He was not in the House. He was in the Senate. And the Senate committee, or committees, that he was in, and in some cases chaired, had a different scope of interest. The Senate and its interest in communist infiltration was within the federal government. The House and its scope of interest had to do with Hollywood, Nazis, and the KKK, among others. Completely different jobs, looking at completely different things. McCarthy had no more influence in what the House was doing than they had with him. Now, a lot of people like to say that McCarthy was hunting for commies in every corner, that he was obsessed, that he was a madman, that the Red Scare was not a scare, and he never found a single commie. It was all a bunch of smoke and mirrors and the rest. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. As I wrote in my book, there were a lot of spies and infiltrators in this country. By the time McCarthy era was over, which was 1957, because he killed himself, or did he just die? I forget what, but anyway. 160 communist infiltrators or spies or sympathizers were caught and prosecuted in this country. 160. That's not none. That's not zero. It's not close to zero. But it doesn't stop there. And this is something the liberals will never talk about. In 1995, there was a thing called the Venona Project, which, now that Russia was no longer the Soviet Union, they opened and laid open their books to the free world. And the Venona Project discovered in the documents in Russia that there were far, far more communist infiltrators and spies in the U.S. government and Hollywood than we had ever dreamt about. Long gone, broken up with the Soviet Union, or even before they broke up, the cells, the sleepers, the spies, the whatnot. But it was way, way more than we had ever thought possible. And we'll continue this idea on the next part of Chapter 9. See you then.